Commandment number 8 today. Only 2 left. The last 2 are going to be handled by a couple other pastors. Pastor Dan and Pastor Zach are going to handle the last 2. But this is the last one I'm going to have with you, so I'm going to give it all I got. Number 8, and it's a really easy one again. We thought the last 2 were easy, didn't we? This is another easy one, or so it seems to be. It's only 4 words. It's just that one verse. It's one of the shortest verses, actually, in the Bible. You shall not steal. You shall not steal. And on the surface, we can say the same thing we did with thou shalt not murder and thou shalt not commit adultery. On the surface, we can just say, well, this is pretty easy. We got this. Let's move on. Let's get on to our baptism that's going to take place, and let's get to lunch early so we can beat the crowds or whatever it is. But I think if we just pause for a moment again, we're going to find that there is more here than maybe what meets the eye. And maybe for most of us here, we'll leave after this message thinking that we really are thieves and robbers, and that we have done it various times and in various ways. Thou shalt not steal. Defining steal is really simple. The dictionary defines it this way: to take that which belongs to another. To take something that's not yours. We can all get that. Even the youngest among us can understand what stealing is. To take something that doesn't belong to you, or, and here's another definition of stealing, to withhold unjustly or injuriously. To take that which doesn't belong to you and to withhold unjustly or injuriously. So I started thinking in my mind about the times that I've stolen something. And I certainly wasn't a thief as we would define the term thief, but when I was 13 years old, I was hanging around with a couple of guys that weren't very good influences in my life. And their parents would probably say I wasn't a very good influence in their kid's life. But anyway, we got together, and it was the 3 of us, and we would get into mischief, and we sort of experimented with different things. And one time we were walking through the woods, and we saw that there was a trailer, just a mobile home that looked to be abandoned. There was no signs of life, and we peeked in the windows, and it was filled with all sorts of junk. It looked like it was probably a hoarder's paradise at some point. And somehow we decided that it would be okay for us to break in. And so, yes, I broke in entry. Yes, that was me. Went into this mobile home, rummaged through stuff that didn't belong to us, and I couldn't find anything to take except a little wire caliper. It's just a caliper that measures the thickness of wires. What I had in mind to do with that at 13-year-old, I had no idea, but it looked cool, so I took it. We got out of that mobile home, and again, I know it was an abandoned house. But nevertheless, we were thieves. 13 years old, my criminal life began. And thank God I got saved. Who knows, I could be in prison right now. That could have led to another crime and another theft, but I was so overcome with guilt over that. I felt so terrible. I was raised, I knew better than to steal. I knew better than to break into a house, regardless of what my friends were doing. I knew that it was wrong. And that little caliper became like, remember Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart? Remember that? The beating of the heart under the floorboard. It's terrifying if you read that short poem or that short story. That was like that for me, that Telltale Heart. That thing was just, every time I saw it, it just screamed at me, you're a sinner and you're going to hell. And so I threw it away, and I got my heart right with Jesus. And I'm glad to say that I can't really remember after that if I ever stole anything again. It was probably the last time that I would have actually took a physical item that didn't belong to me. And I'm sure as you're sitting there, you're probably thinking sometimes in your life, maybe where you've taken something that wasn't yours. Maybe you were in the 3rd grade and you passed by Susie Cream Cheese desk, and she had that brand new eraser that she got on the bottom of the Captain Crunch cereal, and you just procured it for yourself as you passed by. Maybe it was something innocent, and like something a child would do, but maybe it was something bigger. But you can think of that time in your life where you actually stole something that belonged to somebody else. And that's really the definition that we think of most often when we think of thou shalt not steal, taking personal property that belongs to someone else. And though this is certainly part of this commandment, make no mistake that is definitely here. We see that here. It's clear. God is concerned about our relationship with one another, and so he gave this commandment first and foremost so that we could have a better relationship with each other, and also knowing that the condition of sin being what it was. I believe that initially there was no need for anything, especially a commandment like thou shalt not steal, because it takes with it or brings with it the idea of personal ownership. And in the Garden of Eden before the fall, everything belonged to God, and man was just enjoying all that was God's, and so there was no idea then of this property belongs to me, you shall not trespass. But after sin came into the world, everything changed, and the sinful nature came in, and so there had to be some laws that would help us live together so we didn't kill each other. And one of them was this, thou shalt not steal. Can you imagine what the society would be like if stealing was acceptable? If you could just walk outside and you see a car and you say, hey, I kind of like this car today, so I'm going to take it home. And then when you get home, somebody else had decided to get into your house and they liked your television, so they just decided that they were going to take the television to their house. Can you imagine the chaos that would go on in our world if stealing was acceptable? Even the founding of our country, our Constitution, is woven together with certain rights, and some would even argue that all of the rights that we have in our Constitution are, in a sense, a type of property ownership or property rights, so that others do not steal from us and we don't steal from others. But there's more that can be stolen than just a wire calipers and Susie Cream Cheese's eraser. There are other things that we can steal as well, and I want to look at those with you just for a few minutes. One of the things that can be stolen is when we don't get what we have paid for. You can steal from someone by not giving them what they paid for. That happens to me sometimes when I go to McDonald's. You know, you pay for the large fry and they give it to you and it's only half full. Come on. Does that annoy anybody but me? Like, wait, I wanted the biggie fry. I could pour these into like a medium, give me what I'm paying for. You're filling up the drink and you're not filling it to the top. I'm not getting everything that I bargained for. We had a contract, we had an agreement. I give you money and you give me a biggie fry, not a medium fry. And so we can steal when the contract hasn't been met and the service agreement hasn't been met. Hey, there are lawyers who are extremely wealthy because of this very thing. And all of us have had those times when we've ordered something and we get it and it's not what we paid for. I think that's even worse now when you're buying things online. I can't tell you what a hassle it has been in my life when I order something online, I get it, and it's not right, and now I'm in this quandary. Do I go through the trouble of sending it back, or do I just keep it and not buy from them again? And I don't know about you, but a lot of times, more often than not, I choose just to, keep it and not buy from them again, rather than to repackage it and go to the post office or UPS and to send it back. But we get stuff that we don't bargain for because we've asked and we've paid and we've entered an agreement and not gotten, and that's a way that you can be stolen from. How about from your employer? You worked the overtime, but they didn't pay you the overtime. You worked and they said they were going to give you certain benefits, but they didn't give you any benefits. Have you ever been in that situation? When you worked for someone or a company and you didn't get what they said you were going to? You probably weren't silent about that. You probably spoke up. But how about the other way? How about the times when you punched out early? Or the times when you took a little extra lunch break? A few years ago, I'll be honest, a few decades ago, I worked at Kmart. Anybody ever work at Kmart? Remember Kmart? So for those young enough in the crowd, it's like Walmart, but with a K. It's the same type of store, Kmart. Kmart was a big deal about 4 decades ago. And I got a job working at Kmart. I was 18 years old. It was a full-time summer job. And I was what we called then, it's probably not politically correct to call them that now, but I was a stock boy. That was my title. It's a stock boy. And there were 2 of us that worked the day shift full-time. Like I said, it was a big Kmart, and there were 2 full-time stock boys, and our job was to unload the truck, put the stock into the warehouse, and some of it we would bring out to the floor and stock the shelves. Pretty simple job. It didn't take a college degree. It didn't even take a high school diploma. It was just straightforward. We unload trucks and we stock shelves. That's what we did. And I remember one day this big truck came in and our manager said, okay, guys, there's the truck, get it unloaded. And so I started to unload the truck, and I was just grabbing stuff and putting it away. And the guy that I was working with, he was probably 10, 15 years older than me. He was in his 30s. And he stopped me, he says, hey, man. We said man back then, not dude. Hey, man. He said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm putting this stuff away, like they told us to. And he said, it was not like he was quoting from the old song. He said, hey, slow down. You're moving too fast. You got to make the morning last, right? You're going too quick, man. This isn't just a 2 or 3 hour job. This is an all-day job, he said. So slow down. And I took his advice. I was new. He was older. And so I slowed down. And sure enough, it made it last all day long. And by the time we were done, the boss was happy, I guess. They didn't say anything to us. And certainly they lowered their expectation about how much work that we could get done in a day. But I look back at that now and I say, you know what I was doing? Well, we call it milking the clock. But I was really stealing from my employer. You see, I'd contracted to work a full day for a full day's pay. I wasn't working the full day. I knew that I wasn't. I was working slow. I was milking that clock. I was making it stretch as far as I could, but I was still getting the full day's pay. So all of us have probably had an employer that we felt like they've taken advantage of us and maybe robbed us. But how about us toward the employer? How about us as employees? Have we stolen? Another thing that we can be thieves with or steal, and that is peace and joy. Do you know you can steal peace and joy? Because you've encountered these people as well. The people that when you invite them to a party, they suck all the fun out of the room. You know those people. You don't invite them to your party for that reason. They get there and all of a sudden everyone's happy, and by the time, I remember an old movie, it was the Odd Couple. And there was a scene in the movie, The Odd Couple, not the show. There was a scene about that where they invited some young ladies over, and Felix just brought the room all the way down. By the time they were done, everybody was crying in the room, and it was supposed to be a party. You've experienced this before, and you know people like that. Hopefully that's not you, but people who just seem to take all the enthusiasm out of things. They steal passion. They steal encouragement. This is why we need to be careful who we share our dreams and our desires and those passions that God has put into our lives. Be careful who you share them with, because there are people that'll just steal them from you and take away your enthusiasm and take away your passion for that. There are some people that are so negative that, well, we can say this here, that they'll complain about a sunny day in Binghamton. I mean, who does that? But there are people that will. Like the old commercial for Life cereal. Hey, Mikey, he won't like it. He hates everything. There are people that will steal joy and encouragement, steal passion and excitement. There's certainly those people that will steal peace. We call them, in the Bible, troublemakers. We also call them instigators. They're people that stir contention in a room. They'll walk into a room and they'll they'll just stir it up. They're in a meeting and they'll stir up contention. They'll instigate problems and conflicts that were never there. So again, I have a personal example of this because I've done this before. And I was a little kid growing up in Florida, and we sometimes didn't have anything to do, and I was just roaming around looking for something to do, as kids did back then. We didn't have 24-hour cartoons, and we didn't have video games, and so we went outside and we tried to make something happen. That's what we did. We built forts and did stupid things. And I did a lot of stupid things. And one of those days when I was bored and I didn't know what to do, I would go to the mound of fire ants. Do you know what fire ants are? We don't have them here in New York. I don't believe there are fire ants in New York. If you've ever lived in Florida or the South, you know what fire ants are. And if they ever get on you, you'll know why they call them fire ants. They're the worst thing in the world. They crawl up on you, you don't even know they're there, and it's like they give a command and they all bite at the same time. It's the craziest thing. But I would go and I'd find a fire ant hill, and I'd find a regular black ant hill, and you know what I would do? Some of you are looking at me smiling because you did it too. You take the black ants and the red ants and you mix them together and you sit back and you watch the chaos, right? Watch the conflict, watch the battle, stirring up, instigating. There are people that do that as adults on a much more profound level than that. And they can steal peace. If you're not careful, they do that in the church. They stir contention and stir strife. And they can rob peace from a congregation. I've seen that happen as well. You know, all of us have different personalities, certainly, and some of us have different degrees of humor and different types of humor. All of us, you know, some people, they'll laugh at anything and everything. And there are other people that they don't know, they wouldn't know a joke if it hit them in the face. They won't laugh. They're just the personality. And I'm not talking about personality types here, but the Bible also talks to us about a complaining spirit. We can't just say, well, that's my personality is to complain. The Bible says, no. If that's your personality, then there's a sinful nature at work, and you have a complaining spirit. And I just want to caution you that if you have a complaining spirit, be careful that that complaining spirit isn't an excuse for you stealing and robbing joy from other people or peace from other people. Because you complain about everything, you don't like anything, and someone who maybe is excited and you say, no, don't be excited about that. And so you rob peace and you rob joy. You still with me? I just got 4. This is number 3. We can steal reputation. We can steal someone else's identity. And I don't mean identity theft like we have it on the internet and somebody stealing your social security number. That's terrible. But when I say identity theft and reputation, I mean that theft that takes place at the mouth of a gossip or a slanderer who speaks things and says things about you that are untrue. Have you ever been lied about? We've all been lied to. Most of us don't realize we've probably all been lied about at some time or another in our lives. That somebody has said something to another person, misrepresenting us. Maybe even there's some facts in their misrepresentation, but the context is off. And so they say things to other people that would give them an impression that you're a person that you're not. And in so doing, they're stealing your reputation. They're saying lies about you. They're assailing your integrity. And that's why the lips of a gossip are so dangerous. I tell all those that are leaders that I am in contact with and leadership here at the church and other opportunities that I have to speak to leadership, how important it is to guard against this to the best of your ability. Sometimes it doesn't take a moral failing to destroy you. It doesn't take even an ethical failing to destroy you. Sometimes it only takes an accusation of those types of acts. It doesn't have to be any truth in it because we like to believe the sensational, and people like to accept and believe that which is, the most salacious. And so sometimes all it takes is a false witness, and that's what you're going to look at next week. A false witness, a lie, an accusation that's through to destroy and to rob someone's reputation, and in ministry to rob someone's ministry. The Bible says this: if you strike the shepherd, the sheep will be scattered. Satan knows that so well that if he can strike the leadership, if he can strike at the pastors and the church leaders, the sheep will be scattered. And so it's so important that those that are in positions of leadership within the church, whether they be pastors or other positions of leadership, that you always try your best to guard yourself and your reputation. I was watching a news story, and I think it was a video. I don't know where it was, regular news online. But it was a couple of guys that were out in the street corner. They were dressed in military uniforms, and they were collecting money for the veterans, whatever it was, wounded veterans, whatever it was, but they had their bucket out there, and they were walking in this intersection around cars, and people were just dumping money at it, until somebody saw them that knew better and recognized that the uniform that they were wearing wasn't correct. The way in which they were wearing it wasn't correct. Some of the insignias were in the wrong locations on the uniform. Long story short, these guys just went to the Army surplus store, bought some uniforms, put them on, and then walked around with buckets collecting money, disguising themselves as military when they were not. That sort of devolved rather quickly, that story, because the man who caught them was furious, to say the least. Furious because they were stealing valor. They were taking credit for something that they had no right taking credit for. Have you ever done that? Maybe you haven't dressed up in a military outfit and impersonated someone that served in the army, but maybe you've taken credit for something that really you shouldn't have. Maybe there was a project at work, or there was something going on, and somebody said, "Oh, you did such a great job." And rather than you saying, "No, it really wasn't me, it was them," you say, "Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that." Or maybe you were involved in a project and the project was successful, and rather than sharing the credit with others, you took it all for yourself, stealing that valor and that recognition from another person. I think we've been guilty of that probably before. The last one I want to talk about here is found in the Bible. It's the prophet Malachi chapter 3. It says, "Will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me." But you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Couldn't avoid this one. We're talking about stealing and robbing and theft. And here in the Old Testament, God says, "You are robbing me." And they say, "How are we robbing you, God?" He says, "This is how you're doing it, by withholding the tithes and the offering." Now, this isn't a sermon on tithing and offering, but I do need to say a couple of words about it here. There are many that push back against the concept of the tithe because the tithe is in the law. Though this whole sermon series has been based in the law of Moses. But they say, no, we don't have to follow this anymore because it's in the law. Jesus spoke about the law, and he said, "I have come not to abolish it, but to fulfill it." Jesus, in addressing some of the commandments of the law of Moses, didn't say it's no longer valid, but he took it up to a whole new level. We also find that the tithe is not just the invention of the law. It wasn't just even given by God to Moses, but it had existed before the law. Abraham tithed, and he was around hundreds of years before Moses ever got on the scene. So we see the tithe all throughout the Old Testament. We even see it in the New Testament when Jesus, lambasting as he often did the Pharisees, he said to them, he says, "You tithe and give a tenth of your cumin and your spice." And He says, but you neglect the more weightier areas of the law, which is justice and mercy. He said, you should have done the former without forgetting the latter. In other words, it should have been a both and, guys. We also see Paul giving instruction to the church. He doesn't use the word tithe, but he says to them, on the first day of the week, everyone set aside of money in proportion to their income, which is a ratio of income to their giving, which is what a tithe is, and so that it can be collected for the work of the Lord. We see all of this in the Bible, but I do agree that today we shouldn't follow the tithe as a law, but it's a principle. There are all sorts of things in Scripture, in the Old Testament and the New alike, that aren't there as laws, but are there as principles to be applied and to be followed. And I believe in the principle of tithing, that we give back to God a tenth of what He has blessed us with for the work of His kingdom. I believe in the principle of offerings, that we, on top of our tithes, we give offerings. I believe we prioritize this in our finances. Why? Because by doing so, not only are we being obedient to God, but we are practically helping to fulfill the mission of the church. And we are declaring to the Lord that He is Lord of our finances. When my wife and I do our budget, we live on a budget. I hope you do too. We live on a budget. I love Dave Ramsey's stuff. He said, tell every dollar where to go, because if you don't tell it where to go, it's going to fly away. And so we do a budget every year. And in the right column on the page, we have income. And on the left column, we have expenses. That's a long list, and the income is a short one. But the number one thing on that list of expenses that we put up is tithe. Then after the tithe, we put our offering, which for us at times is, it's always missions, and then sometimes it's other things. Like right now, we're in a church, Let's Go, and so Let's Go has been added to our giving. And we set that there, and we prioritize that because God is the first in our lives, so He is the first in our finances. And we recognize that everything on that right column is from Him anyway. I was talking to my son about tithing, and I told him, I said, Dylan, the tithe is a jumping off point or jumping in point for the New Testament believer. It's not the end, it's the beginning place. If the Old Testament, those living under the cumbersome law of the Old Testament, who had to make daily sacrifices for their sins, if they were giving a tenth of their income and offering to the Lord, how much more so those of us who have the blessed grace of Jesus Christ, and we don't have to walk under the burdensome edicts of the law. How much more should we respond in generosity than them? So he says, you rob from me, the Lord said, because you withhold this. There's a lot more that could be said about the tithe, and that's okay if you argue. That's okay if you say, no, I don't believe it's still, Pastor. I believe that's Old Testament law. That's done away with. I would just ask you to check your heart. You can believe that if you want. I'm not going to die on that hill. That's fine. But I would ask you to check your heart. Is that position you're taking so that you don't even have to give the 10%? Are you taking a position like that because you don't even want to give that much to the Lord? Are you taking a position like that because it helps you justify the fact that you're not generous with God and that He's not first in your finances? Only you can answer that question. But the New Testament teaches us that we are to be generous because God has been so generous to us. And I believe that the tithe and the offering is the beginning point for us. But it's not just neglecting the tithe and the offering. I believe this would be in keeping with the words of Malachi, especially in light of the New Testament. And that is the withholding of our talents and our abilities and our time. God has given those to us as well, not just the money that's in our bank account, but He's given us abilities. He's given us talents. He's invested these things in our lives. The New Testament says that we are a body of Christ, and the body is made up of many parts, and all the parts are vitally important, and all the parts function together in order to make a body healthy. And so God gives gifts to his church, but sadly there are some that rob from God by not offering those gifts back to his church, and they rob from the church by doing so. So they're withholding their talents and their gifts and their abilities that God has given for his service and for his care, for the furthering of his kingdom. Those things that God has given into your life that would encourage someone else here, when you hold that back, you're stealing that encouragement from them. Sadly, this is the case of most churches, and we're not the exception to the rule. But sadly, the situation even here at City Church is that there are people that serve in different capacities in the church, and they have to serve so often and so much because there's no one else to help them serve. And so you have people in our kids ministry that watch our kids and that have to do it every single week because there's no one else that steps up and says, you know what, I have a gift and I have an ability and I can help in this as well to make your burden lighter so that you can come in the service once in a while. I believe all the gifts and the talents and all the finances that God's church needs is in the church. Just that we have to stop robbing and start giving. I close with this as the worship team can start making their way and those in the back can start preparing. But stealing is about taking and withholding. Thou shalt not steal. It's about taking and about withholding. Yet Jesus gave us an example of giving. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. That Jesus laid down his life. He gave his life for us. And Psalm 84:11 says that the Father will withhold no good thing from those who walk uprightly. God is a God who gives and who doesn't withhold. Stealing is the exact opposite of the nature of God. In fact, in John 10:10 tells us that stealing is the nature of Satan. He lies, he kills, and he steals. He's a robber and a thief. But God is one who gives and one who doesn't withhold. 2 Peter says he has given us everything we need for life and godliness. Stealing is not in God's nature, and he doesn't want it to be in ours. He wants us to be people who give and people who do not withhold. People who are honest in all of their dealings with their employees and with their employer. People who don't steal others' peace or others' joy, but actually give peace and give joy by their very nature and their words and their actions. He doesn't want us to be those that are robbing from him because we're holding so tight to the money, because it can buy us things and stuff, but rather we give generously, as his word tells us. We don't take all the acclaim and all the that-a-boys to ourselves, but we share it with others. We don't put the spotlight on us and our deeds, but we put the spotlight on other people, and we celebrate them. This is who he's called us to be. So you see, there's a lot more in this verse, thou shalt not steal, than maybe what meets the eye. And maybe there's something in there that rings that bell in our own heart and lives and says, oh God, forgive me, a sinner.